Then there's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus in conversation about their lives, their legislative priorities, policies, and other related issues that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. As State Senator Lena Gonzalez reminded us on this podcast a couple of months ago, expressing her excitement and admiration for her new legislative colleagues joining her for the new session in 2023, we all have stories, she said. We all look good on paper with our professional designations and degrees, but at the end of the day, she said, we all have a story that we'll be coming in with and legislating off of. And that affirms our recent focus on not only the proud demographic boundary breaking of what has been called the most diverse California legislature in our state's history, but also prompting us to showcase the extraordinary journeys that are part of the individual lives of this new legislative class of 2023. Experiences that have brought them to this point in their lives with survival skills and vantage points. As Senator Gonzalez referenced so thoughtfully, part of their legislative priorities. On this edition of Then There's California, we're going to meet another one of our class of 2023 legislators. Caroline Menjivar represents the newly designated 20th Senate District in the San Fernando Valley, including Van Nuys, Panorama City, Reseda, Northridge, a valley that has been her home for all of her life. Senator Menjivar is the daughter of Central American immigrants. She's a military veteran, worked as an emergency first responder while going to college, has a master's in social welfare from UCLA, served in LA Mayor Eric Garcetti's Office of Gender Equity. She's a member of both legislative Latino and LGBTQ caucuses. And speaking of legislative diversity firsts, she is the first member of the LGBTQ community to represent the San Fernando Valley in the state legislature. And she's already showing her freshman leadership creds, taking over this year as the new chair of the Senate Budget Subcommittee on Health and Human Services. And we're really glad to have her with us. Welcome, Senator Menjivar.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Welcome to the Senate. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's raining outside. I'm loving the gloomy weather. You know, I represent communities in LA County in a valley that is always hot.
Yes.
And also kind of always physically on fire.
That's true. Things going well, and you're already fitting in, transitioning into the Senate process,
Yes.
which I know has been life-changing.
It has been. Actually, we are 2 days shy of being 100 days in office. Can you believe it?
Are you feeling like an old pro now?
You know what? No, definitely not. You know, there's so much to learn. There's so much to learn. And I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I listened to some of your previous podcasts.
Yes.
And, you know, there's one, Senator Connie Leyva.
Yes.
Her exit interview. And she said, this is like the best college you can ever go to because it's constantly learning. It's so true. It's a college. I've done 18 years of school and I thought I was done, right? Because it's a lot. But coming here, it's taking a course here, 101 here, you know, sociology 101 like you would in college, but here it's like energy 101, gas and oil 101, and I'm loving every minute of it.
Well, and I remember Senator Leyva also spoke to the fact that she had to be a mini expert on everything.
Yes. You know, I had a coffee with Caroline event over the weekend. These are my ways I can stay in touch with the community. And my district director and a constituent were talking about how is she able to respond to all these questions? There are an array of topics. And I'm throwing out stats and I'm throwing out information that I've learned here, but it's because of all the briefings I get. So I am, you know, becoming more and more of this generalist of understanding main topics of different areas.
Are you handling the trip to Sacramento 4 days a week now? Has that family adjustment down in the valley been okay?
So my family unit is my wife and my 2 fur babies. And to be honest, I see him more in one of my dogs than I do in my wife. You know, my beagle... I see him more and more sad each time I leave. This was the guy that was attached to my hip. This is my beagle. He was my hiking buddy. And, you know, I've had him since a pup, and I can see him sad every single time I leave the door. Obviously, my wife misses me too, but I definitely see it in my doggy's face. But we're adjusting. She got a fully remote job, and she'll be coming up here to live like about 85% of the time. So we're making it work.
That's great. I know as time goes on, you transition, you get used to it, you adapt to it, and Sacramento can be your home.
Absolutely.
Another home. I have told several people that we were going to be speaking today, and all of them in keeping with the enthusiasm about this new class and without any prompting, the minute I mention your name, like, oh, wow, she is amazing. I can't wait to meet her. I can't wait to hear this conversation. I'm just excited about her. So no pressure.
No pressure.
But have you
go.
felt that excitement? Have you felt that anticipatory feeling that people are directing toward you? Or is it motivating or is it pressure inducing?
I have felt the pressure, actually. This pressure of like, well, you did all this to get up here. You know? So what are you going to do here? You're going to knock it out of the park. So I did feel that pressure in the beginning, like the first couple of weeks. And it was a little... It was heavy, actually. It was really heavy. But, it was, what did that level expectation mean for me? And really honing in on this and understanding that level, right? So I think in the beginning, I was like, I'm expected to do everything just because people are like so excited about having this young progressive individual here. But then after a while, I sat with what that meant for me. And I've just been I've always had a go-to attitude, a yes, I'll help attitude. And I think that's really been helping me here, which is why people are excited about it.
That's good. Well, I know it's hard to keep up that level of charm 20 hours a day, but good for you that you are adjusting and calibrating your own expectations of yourself in that process too. Let me get some of your perspectives on, in particular, the unique diversity of this class that you are part of, how it contributes to the greater diversity of the legislature as a whole. You are representative of the LGBTQ caucus and the Latino caucus. Talk about that great diversity that rests even just with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've said that I've had this triple dagger my whole life. I'm a lesbian, I'm a woman, and I'm a woman of color, right? I haven't been able to, you can't get away from discrimination, identifying on these levels. You've always had to have a level of survival, being on the defense. And I'm excited, or I'm glad that I'm a Marine, that I can turn to some of those survival actual skills that I was taught to be able to navigate this world as a queer woman of color. But it's so exciting to bring those perspectives up here, Brian, because honestly, it's really what, you mentioned in the beginning what Senator Gonzalez said, right? These stories that are so important because there's so much power behind introducing legislation that speaks to the experiences that you've had, experiences that you can talk about on a firsthand basis. So as a woman, as a Latina, representing a majority Latino district, you know how to fight to make sure that my community had a Latino representative. It's 60% Latino. And it needed someone who, one, spoke the language that they spoke, but also brought those similar life experiences. And talking about the LGBTQ plus one, I mean, for me, that's my most loved identity of myself. That I'm, very proud lesbian, and I recognize that growing up, it was really, really hard to be a queer kid. Not as hard as perhaps other people, in the earlier ages, but it was still hard. So coming in here, being able to represent for queer kids, it's a feeling that I never forget. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Senator Gonzalez and everything that you're saying. We all have a story, including you, as you have already referenced here, navigating a life of economic hardship, starting in an early age, housing inequity, sexual identity challenges. How do those life experiences inform you now? All of that you've went through.
Absolutely. So, almost all my bills, I have a personal story towards, right? So when people ask me to talk about my bills, yes, I give the legislative analysis of it, but I also talk about how it can directly impact people because I felt that. I have bills related to mental health and bringing more cultural competency for a mental health therapist because I've been on the receiving end of therapists who were homophobic and didn't realize it, who really pushed me away from mental health when I desperately needed because I couldn't find someone who could really see me as a whole person. Or I've introduced legislation regarding CalFresh and the need for, increasing our maximum amounts because I have a mom on CalFresh, because she cleans homes and it's a job that honestly isn't a stable job, right? So I can speak to the direct impacts these will have. I talk about housing insecurity and introducing bills that are related to youth homelessness and cutting out the middle person. Well, because I was unhoused when I was 19 years old. And although I never considered myself a homeless person at that time, like I was couch surfing, I was excited that I got to couch surf on all my friends' couches, but until now, did it sink in and say, like, I didn't have a home. And I want to make sure no other youth experiences that. So that's why it's so important in our stories, to share them, to let people know, yes, we've experienced all of this, but look, like, if we have adults who are fighting to remove those barriers and then they get to this point, that's the end game, right? To have people who know who've experienced that.
Exactly.
And remove those barriers.
I think that's the blessing and the authenticity that you bring to this, is that you are not legislating on behalf of some unfamiliar community. You are legislating to heal some of the situations that are still existing in communities that you dealt with.
Oh, 100%.
Let's talk about your story. I mean, we're talking about you, but let's talk more about you. Get into more of the details, your family dynamics, your daughter of immigrants, sexual identity, coming of age, meeting your now wife, college, and running for office and being elected here. Give us some of that story.
When I first, launched my campaign, I did this dive in of my life with my consultants, right? And it did a quick overview. And then they would ask more questions. Like, I've always done a brush over of my life. But when it's like talking about really great things, oh, yeah, I was an EMT, like, was in the Marine Corps, I lead with that. And it's always been a struggle. My consultant's like, you need to pull out that story. Like, it took a while for me to say, oh, yeah, like, we were evicted. Oh, yeah, the struggle is behind that. Because I was just like, oh, I couch surf, But, my story, sometimes when I think about it, I was like, wow, poor little Caroline, But I don't like to think about that because, yes, poor little Caroline, but also like, look at all the great teachers that got involved in my life, or my uncle or my aunt who helped my mom out. Like, look at my strong mom and the example she gave. But, daughter of Salvadorian immigrants, we lived in an apartment, in a 1-bedroom apartment that we shared with my uncle or my aunt at every given time. Like, I lived with my mom's siblings almost all my life, And, I didn't have a dual parent household for a long time. And I was very much straight out of a book, the definition of what a kid goes through when their parents separate. I thought it was my fault. I risky behavior as a young kid, and trying to navigate that on top of finding out that you're a lesbian, like, that was hard. That was really, really hard. But I felt that if I stuck to my education, I'd have a way out. So even though I was dealing with a lot of issues, like, I never let my education fall behind, because I knew that was the way for me to get out of my socioeconomic situation, out of the situation of not being accepted by my family. And I'm glad I did, because now I'm here and I get to, again, address those same issues that a lot of other kids are going through.
And you obviously now are the first LGBT representative, as we said, of the San Fernando Valley. Talk about that and the significance that has in your life and as a role model to some degree of the community.
I share a story often that really hit me when I was working at Mayor Eric Garcetti's office, and also as a board member of GLSEN LA, which serves to provide training to K through 12 schools. I was at a high school in the district I represent. I was connecting with a GSA, which is called the Gay Straight Alliance Clubs, and a young girl, 11th grade, 11th or 12th, I can't remember. I was talking to them, I finished, I was like, Q&A. She's like, how is it that you're a lesbian and you can work for the mayor? How is that allowed? And Brian, I froze. I was like, how, why? We're in LA. I thought, this is this blue bubble. Everyone should know that they can be whatever they want. And that girl didn't think that. She didn't have representation. And I think about now, yes, you have some LGBTQ plus representation in WeHo and Hollywood and these affluent areas, predominantly white areas. But in my community, there's no representation, and it's still taboo, because these are communities that still have the cultural layer on top of it. Christianity, people who, turn to the Catholic upbringings are like, no, you can't be gay. You can't be LGBTQ. So I now am really focused on bringing the representation into these BIPOC communities, where I'm invested in bringing a brick and mortar Pride Center into my area that we don't have one, bringing Pride festivals to my area. And it's not just about, I'm not trying to bring a party. I'm trying to make sure that when we have these festivals, a young queer kid looks out and sees, I look like that person, or that person looks like me. They're queer, they're out. This is a safe space for me. So it's important.
And it just reminds me of a question I thought of before in past podcast conversations with both Senator Laird and with Pro Tem Atkins. Each have reflected on the freedom and liberation that the latest generation of LGBTQ plus youth have, and their glad surprise to witness younger members of the community openly coming out. A personal freedom that they would have never, the lawmakers, your colleagues, would never have considered when they were coming of age. And they expressed this surprise and this gratefulness and this public openness and willingness that the LGBTQ youth have. The young people are teaching them. What are your comments on that? Because you're kind of sandwiched in there somewhere in between.
I'm sandwiched in the middle, and that's what I meant. Like, their generation was way worse than my generation, but my generation still wasn't the greatest, right? Like, Brian, I had to come out like a couple of times, where in high school I thought it was just a phase for me because I grew up in a very, very Christian household. So I was like, no, this is not right. And then I officially came out to my mom at the age of 24. 24 years old, 10 years after I had come out to myself or was navigating that.
That's a long 10 years.
That's a long time. You know, you had the don't ask, don't tell in between that.
Right, which you dealt with in the military.
Which I dealt with.
Right.
You know, you also had, me just navigating that. So I still struggled a lot. And to this day, even struggle. You know, I was with my mom over the weekend. I was looking to buy shoes. And I went on the side that for men, I guess you would say, right? And I was really interested in these yellow shoes. I was like, they're phenomenal. My mom was like, why are you buying those? Those are for men. And I was like, why are you wearing men's clothes? I was like, Mom, it's just shoes. You know, and Brian, like, you haven't seen, like, I have a very masculine side. I just haven't been able to show it yet. But, like, I sometimes dress very masculine. And I've sometimes have to hide that part with my family still. A family that if I'm really overt about my lesbianism, they'll push back. So there's still a need for Black and brown communities to get a lot of support, because right now we're having the highest rates of LGBTQ plus youth having suicide ideations, depression. A stat, 70% of LGBTQ plus students experience persistent feelings of sadness or hopeless during the past year.
Yes.
50% cite poor mental health and 25% have attempted suicide. So yes, while we can see more people coming out, there is still a need to support our queer youth.
Absolutely. Now that you have a spouse, that you are married, how are you navigating that? If you want to talk about it.
Yes. No one came to our wedding. My family did not come to my wedding.
Wow.
One uncle came to my wedding, and he passed away now. So that was hard. It's rough talking about it. That's the part, like, I always brush over because that's not a happy part. But my wife's family is so accepting of us.
So somewhere in this process, you've had acceptance, you've had understanding.
My wife's family has always been accepting.
And for the rest of the folks in your life, it's a learning journey then.
Yes, it's a constant,
whether it's shoes or something
don't
else.
Be obvious about it.
Yeah.
I hit a point where I tell my family, you're either accepting me by pretending or you're never going to see me again. And I had to do that, like an ultimatum, to get to the point where I am now. But my mom now, she's come a long way. She's so excited that I'm here, so excited. And I'm not hiding, anything. I have some bills that I'll joke. I'm like, oh, my mom is not going to be happy with this bill, providing free condoms to high school youth across the state of California. Or, I just came from a press conference on the Future of Abortion Council, and if my mom were to see that, of course, she'd be upset. But I'm very unapologetic of how I am. And while, maybe it still hurts in a way, I know that I'll work through this pain so that the future generation doesn't have to experience a single ounce of it.
And I think, again, that's part of the blessing, too, is that you're there for those that are standing on your shoulders, so to speak, to say, I've lived this. I'm learning myself even still how to transgress it and deal with it, and I'll help show you the way.
Right, and I'm open about that. I'm social worker, right? Mental health is very important for me. Being aware of your feelings. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be mad. Have good outlets for that, not have maladaptive coping mechanisms that, most people turn to.
Thank you for sharing all of that, for being so candid. You have recently been appointed to the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. I can imagine that's a very significant platform for you. I want to talk about that platform and I guess to ask, what is the status of women and girls here in California in 2023?
The status is that 1 in 5 girls are dealing with severe mental health issues. 1 in 5 girls in the most recent CDC report have attempted suicide. Right. That's an alarming number.
It is. It's not surprising in some ways, but it's still very, very alarming and sad.
It's alarming. And, this is like a really full circle for me, or kind of like in the end point, but the starting point. I was in the mayor's gender equity as a team, as a fellow. I started in as a fellow when I was a grad student, and I started in this work. And I'm a very proud feminist, a loud feminist, and I had my awakening as an undergrad. In the beginning, I was a little bit more radical. Like, I would say, we can't watch this movie because they said guys, or we can't watch this movie because, I would criticize everything. I've adjusted, I'm bearable now, but language for me is so important, right? For me, the word freshman, I know the roots of that. Didn't include women. I like to be looked at as a first term or, senator or a fresh person or something like that. Language for me is really important. So when I think about being appointed, I think about all the work I did as a fellow, the work in getting more women in the fire service. I wanted to be a firefighter before. And for 10, 15 years, I tried. And I didn't meet my first female firefighter until like I had already started wanting to be in this field for like 7, 8 years. It took a long time. And then my mentor, a female firefighter, committed suicide because there's so much harassment, extra burnout for women in the fire service. So I'm always looking to see how we can get more girls in different things. I found out that the city of LA only had 2 women to be tree surgeons. The people who climbed trees and clipped them, it was a great paying job, but it was only 2 women. Over the weekend, I visited LA Conservation Corps, and there was 1 woman in this crew of 6. Right. And I thanked her for, I guess, her service. I was like, thank you for holding it down for the women. And I'm really excited that you're out here working with your hands. So I'm always looking at lens through that intersectionality. Right. And for the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls, I'm excited to bring in the veteran perspective, the queer perspective, the Latina perspective, to think about our female veterans that are often forgotten. MST, military sexual trauma, is so prevalent. I was a domestic violence therapist before. So talking about domestic violence and how, obviously, yes, men are victims as well, but it disproportionately impacts women. So I'm really excited to be working in this commission and continue my passion through those lenses.
Wow, you are really walking the walk here. Have walked the walk, I guess, and what you've brought here to Sacramento. We don't have a lot of time to do a touch on every single bill you have, but just quick top-line description of some of these bills. SB 11, improving the quality and accessibility of, as you mentioned, of mental health services for students at CSU campuses. SB 260, the Menstrual Equality Act of 2023, and then you have a bill, again, as you say, that would double the minimum monthly CalFresh benefit for California from $23 to $50. Again, anybody who reads this can see where your progressive lens is and where your focus is, but give us a headline, so to speak, and how you're packaging all this and presenting this to California.
I'm presenting this as a package for youth. Honestly, I have some core topics in my package of 16 bills. Youth stands out. You mentioned SB 11, that's for youth, right? SB 223 is also for youth related to mental health in K through 12. I have youth for vision access. I have youth bills related to homelessness, to sexual equity related to the condoms and the HPV vaccine. A lot of youth-centered bills, but also through the lens of how this impacts someone's mental health. You mentioned 260, the Menstrual Equity Act. If you're someone who can't have access to these necessary items, that's going to really hinder your mental health. CalFresh, if you don't have food on the table, that's going to hinder your mental health, right? So it's through the lens of mental health, youth, and just really championing vulnerable populations and uplifting them. I'm here to really uplift my district and Californians as a whole.
Just as a final thought here before we wrap, as you have mentioned, it's all started with the pupusas that brought you up here, right? It was the pupusas that got you here.
Yes, honestly,
Talk about
it's
the
so
pupusas.
true. It's really true. Fundraising was closed off to me. And what I mean by that is that the typical donors didn't want to work with me, or, they were told to stay away. To be honest, they were told. Sacramento's doors were closed off. So where do you turn to as a candidate who is trying to prove to others that she's viable? Just to at least make means throughout the primary, right? So we turn to food, and we turn to what Latinos use as their love language, which is food. Yeah. My mom's love language is like, what can I cook for you? And she wanted to bring something to the table. This is something that she loves doing. So she and my aunts started cooking food. Pupusas, pan con pollo, which are traditional Salvadorian dishes. You have to try them. And we started raising money like that. But each time we were raising like $1,000, $1,500. That's it. Something that one person could give me here in Sacramento, right? But that's how my campaign went on throughout the primary. It was getting small donations from people. I brought different people to the table. We would break bread in my backyard because that's where we did it. And constituents would come in like, oh, this is a real person. This is her home. She's welcoming us into her home. And it really allowed people to see who their representative could potentially be.
And so as you get into this world where people are hanging on your every word, who are amazed at you, you are still have that bridge to keep built with the pupusas, with the people who make them, and the love with which they eat them and share them with you and support you. And are you going to be able to continue to do that through all of it?
That is my goal. Those are the people that got me here. Sacramento didn't get me here. People spending $10 on a pupusa plate got me here. And that's why I prioritize requests when schools ask me to come talk to their kids, or when I have my small informal Latino groups that ask me to come. My first event was speaking at a group that's called Latinos en Diseño. It's a small group of Latina women. And they were like, how are you here? Like, you must be so busy. But those are the people that I need to hear from. I want to have a close relationship and have them engaged civically. So my goal is to prioritize that and never forget where I came from. However cheesy that is, but that's so important.
That's very important, and it's very authentic. And you have my mouth watering about the pupusas.
Oh my God, I got it. I'm trying to figure out a way. I'm trying to figure out. They get cold. They're not the same. They have to be 1 second off the grill.
Right. Thank you so much for this time.
Brian.
It is so great to talk to you. I hope we can have you back again as your legislation starts to gel and marinate and there's issues you want to talk about. And I hope we can do this again sooner than later.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. State Senator Caroline Menjivar from the 20th Senate District in the San Fernando Valley. And that brings us to a close of this edition of Then There's California. We're a production of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus with technical assistance and production support from Martin Ashley, Bob Brulte, Brian Shadden, John Roman, Ann DeGrazia, Michelle Baker, Sergio Reyes, McLeana Woods, and the graphic artistry of Tim Davis. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Thanks for listening to Then There's California.